Welcome to What About PS, a Poland Syndrome podcast, where we talk about all things Poland Syndrome. The episodes that you can look forward to in this podcast speak about the male and female experience, motherhood and breastfeeding, general day-to-day living, health and fitness, and also including hand and chest affected people who have Poland Syndrome. If you have Poland Syndrome, or if you know of someone who has Poland Syndrome, then be sure to have a look out and listen to our latest episodes. Welcome, guys, to another episode. We are really excited to kickstart off this year with a episode talking to Jen, where we're going to be talking about her diagnosis, or her son's diagnosis, misdiagnosis rather, of Poland Syndrome. And this is a really important episode because we really are pushing Poland Syndrome awareness and growing the community in places like Scotland. And so this is really going to help us achieve that. So Jen, thank you so much for joining us again. We had some technical difficulties on the last episode, so hopefully we can get through this one scot-free. So Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me back again.
So we obviously touched on this question the first time we tried to record, but the third time is the charm. Jen, could you share a little bit of the journey of Finley's initial symptoms of his Poland syndrome? What kind of led you to see that something was maybe a bit off, and your experience, obviously, alongside that with the misdiagnosis and just the, experience you had with the healthcare system?
Yeah, so Finley, when Finley was born, he had a webbed hand, which initially at hospital was missed, and it was my mum who noticed it when she came over to visit him. Then I spoke to the midwife at the time about it, and she told me that Finley didn't have a webbed hand because he'd been checked, and he couldn't have a webbed hand because it would have been noticed. However, we pointed it out, and obviously she agreed that yes, he did have a webbed hand. Then from there on, I was told that it was a syndactyly that he had, and it would be rectified when he was old enough for it to be rectified. Then when I was cleared to drive, we would go in the car, and initially he was in the maxi cozy car seat, and when he was in the car he would scream like I've never heard a child scream in my life, and it was just such a painful cry, to the point where we couldn't go in the car, and he would wriggle on his left side as if he was in a lot of pain. And when I looked at him sitting in the car seat, he would sit in a really strange way. So I spoke to the health visitor about it, and the health visitor told me it was reflux that was causing this pain in the car seat. Then when Finley went to get his hand assessed at the hospital, they assessed his hand, and I was told it was syndactyly he had, and he would get his syndactyly release when he was between 2 to 3 for optimum results with regards to his hand movement, which was fine. Then as Finley began to sit up, I noticed when he was sitting up, he would lean over to the right side, but it wasn't more of a balanced side. It always looked as if he just didn't sit right, if that makes sense. And it was really weird. Then when I started to hold him on my, when I would hold him on my hip, when I was holding him, I could feel that my hand would go further back in his left side of his chest. Again, I would speak to the health visitor about it, and the health visitor, her response to me would be, find somebody who's symmetrical, and then we'll talk. And I would say, but I can feel his chest is further back. And I was told that this was normal and that people's bodies don't develop at the same rate. Then I noticed that his left hand wasn't grown as much as his right hand, and it was his left hand that had the syndactyly. So I started to confide in my two best pals, and again I went to the health visitor, and the health visitor just would not entertain me. And me and one of my best friends came up with the idea that we were going to start measuring his hand. And I had all these measurements with his hand, and I was right, his left hand wasn't grown at the same rate as his right hand, and his left hand was massively smaller in his right hand. Again, I went back to the health visitor and I was told that I was tired and I needed some sleep. And then she started asking me how much sleep I was having. And I said to her, I says, well, I don't know what sleep has got to do with this. Like, I've spoke to you about him in a cash seat. I've spoke to him about his chest. I've
Mm-hmm.
spoke to you about his hand. Look at his two hands. You can physically see his two hands. And she put it down to people develop differently. I was tired, all this kind of stuff. Then he was in the bath and he turned round, and the way he turned, I could physically see that his chest was sunk. And he moved his shoulder and he moved his arm to grab his brother. And I noticed he had a hole, or what appeared to look like a hole, under his armpit. Shouted my husband, took a picture, showed the health visitor again, and again she wouldn't entertain it. Spoke to the GP. The GP wouldn't help me because the health visitor was saying that he was fine. So it was just going round and round in circles. And then he started to crawl. And when he started to crawl, he couldn't push himself up on the left side. So he would push himself up on the right side. And then when he tried to push himself up on the left side, he just would fall back over. And it was as if he had no ability to push himself up. And then he would do this it was like an army crawl with his left arm. And again, I spoke to the health visitor and she told me that I needed to go and see the GP. And I thought eventually she's agreeing that there's something not quite right with this. But she didn't mean for me to go and see the GP about Finlay. She told me that I had to go and see the GP because she thought I had postnatal anxiety and that I needed medication because it was affecting my ability to be a mum. So she got asked to leave. And then shortly after that, we went on holiday for my sister's wedding. And because we were on holiday and Finlay was running around with his nappy on, I was very, very aware of people watching him. And I could see people looking at his chest because by this point, you could see that he had a visible difference on his chest. And obviously his hand was a lot more different and his left arm was a lot more skinnier. And then I had already made up my mind because I'd Googled as well. So I had seen I had seen Poland syndrome. And I came home and my mum spoke to me and I'd spoke to my husband and I took him to the doctors and I said to the doctor, I says, somebody has to help me. This is what I think Finlay has. And the doctor agreed that there was something not right. She'd never heard of Poland syndrome and referred me back to plastics. I spoke to the same doctor that I'd spoken to in the January, and they eventually agreed to see him back in clinic, and they said yes. So it wasn't just syndactyly Finlay had. Finlay had Poland syndrome, and he would be referred to a different doctor, for a different doctor to see him and come up with a treatment plan. And that was the start of Finlay's journey with Poland syndrome.
You know what's amazing is that when people don't know about something, they just automatically assume that it isn't real. And I think what's incredible about this story is the gaslighting, and just because the healthcare professionals didn't know almost what they didn't know, they just proceeded to pretty much gaslight you. I mean, the fact that you were sent to a GP for pretty much like having a mental illness or having a mental response to this, instead of just seeing that, oh, there actually is something wrong and we might not know what it is, but we can explore this, is unbelievable. And I think the sad thing is that this happens to a lot of parents who have children with Poland syndrome. Obviously, we were chatting on the other call, but it's exactly what happened to my parents as well. And my mom was, she was accused of physically abusing me, and that's why I pretty much had the missing hole, like you were saying, under the armpit, and that's why my arm almost could roll back, with more flexibility than what it should have. It couldn't have been anything else other than just an abusive parent. And luckily in my case, we did have a doctor who knew what Poland syndrome was, but it's crazy to think that there are probably a lot of parents out there who are experiencing the same thing and don't have any of that support from the healthcare systems that they should have. How did this experience impact you? I mean, obviously, it sounded like it continued over a couple of years, and it sounded like it was a challenging time. But how did it impact you as a mother, and how did you keep motivated to keep searching for the answers instead of just listening to what the healthcare professionals were saying to you?
So I think initially I knew with a mum's instinct that I couldn't understand why he was born with a webbed hand. And I used to think I'd done everything and I didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose initially when I was going to the health visitor, and I suppose with Poland syndrome, because you can have a limb difference as well as a chest difference, and in Finley's case he did, you could physically see that his hand was a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get so angry because you could see it. Like you can look at him and you can see it. And then I would get really, really angry and I would get really upset because for me, Poland syndrome was massive when he was first diagnosed. I was devastated because I
Mm-hmm.
thought this is not what I had planned for my child. And people would say to me, it could be worse. It could be worse. It just could be worse. And it could be worse. But initially I would think to myself, but for me this is as bad as it gets just now. And I speak a lot just now about how healthcare professionals speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked just now about the greatest showman experience. That's kind of how I use to refer to our life. So the children's hospital is our bubble, and in that bubble, everybody in that bubble are absolutely amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
the children's hospital are just they're phenomenal. They're absolutely phenomenal. Outside the children's hospital, it's not as phenomenal, and you're left feeling like it's the greatest showman, and you're in the tent where everybody's coming to look at your child,
Mm-hmm.
and you become very, very aware very, very quickly of people looking at your child.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I used to be in certain situations, and if I went to change Finlay, I would be aware of who would look at him when he was getting changed, if that makes sense, because people would want to see his chest. So I would remove myself because I would get very, very angry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and last year after his surgery, I struggled massively because I was angry. I was angry that it was my child that was having to go through this. And I was angry that it was my oldest son who was having to see his brother go through this.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm just determined to change my anger into something positive for Scotland so that no other families have to go through being told, no, it's everything's fine. When you can tell
Mm-hmm.
as a mum it's not fine, and I'm determined to raise awareness in Scotland and the UK and worldwide about Poland syndrome. And I'm determined to support families going through it as well because it just blows my mind that in the 21st century this is what
Mm-hmm.
families have to experience.
Mm-hmm.
We also had to decide um, we had to decide whether or not Finlay had chest surgery. Um, we got offered chest surgery for Finlay, and that affected me massively because it was a huge decision that we had to make. And I
Mm-hmm.
suppose it was a decision as a mum that I didn't ever expect to have to make, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but we made the decision that he wasn't having the surgery, and I suppose because we are so limited with the information around us,
Mm-hmm.
that affected me, and I suppose that'll always live with me because I'll never know if that was the right answer for Finlay, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Luckily, we've got incredible people like Lewis and Clay and things, and the podcast that they done that helped me massively. Um, but as a mum, you struggle because it's your child,
Yeah.
and you become very, very protective very, very quickly when there's something extra to be protective about, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. And I think, exactly what you were saying. We're in the 21st century. We know about so many things that people didn't know about, even just 50 years ago. And I think we definitely live in a world where us as a society are trying to normalize more and more things. And I think what's interesting about Poland syndrome and what is holding people back from normalizing that is that it's so rare, and whether it's rare because it just genetically is rare and fewer people have it, or because people don't know about it and they're not reporting that they might have it, whichever one it is, the more we do things like this, the podcast, sharing stories with people, the work that you're doing in the space, the work that Sam and Pip and everyone is doing, the more we spread that awareness and talk about it and normalize it, the more people outside of the community will know about it, and the less foreign it would be for them. And I really do have a lot of hope in that, and especially with the work that everyone here is doing. I mean, I this is the first time I've ever met people with Poland syndrome, and I think I met Sam and Pip about 2 years ago. I think already now, just over a year and a half, and that was the first time I'd ever met anyone with Poland syndrome. And now there's this whole community, and I would not have known about it if it wasn't for these groups that were really spreading, the word and raising awareness. And like I said, I was lucky that my doctor knew about it, but I haven't met any other doctor throughout my whole experience that have known about it. I've gone to physiotherapists and world renowned physiotherapists and surgeons who, do a lot of work in the US and the UK and Australia. They're brilliant at what they do, and they don't know about Poland syndrome. And so I think spreading that awareness, not just in the community, but also in, the medical field as well, will really allow us to make huge changes in that. Before we go on and talk about more of what you're doing specifically and really pushing this movement forward, I am interested to know, how is the experience for Finley? Again, from my side, I felt like I had it a lot easier because I knew, I've always known I've had Poland syndrome. It wasn't a situation where I was still trying to figure out what was happening with my body. But for Finley, it sounded like obviously it was a different journey. So how did he deal with that?
So I suppose, well, Finley's only 2.5. Um, so he he doesn't really know any different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's very
Um,
small. I don't think he knows
yeah,
what's going on.
yeah, and I suppose for him, we don't. He he doesn't he doesn't get treated any different.
Mhm.
I was really fortunate, and obviously we came across Sam and Pip very, very soon after Finley's diagnosis, and they've just been amazing. And we did I did some media stuff in Scotland, and from that I've actually a lot of people started contacting me, and I'd message Sam and I'd be like, Sam, all these people are contacting me saying they've got Poland syndrome and they think they've got Poland syndrome. What do I do with this? And I became very, very friendly with this incredible person who has Poland syndrome, and I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulder when this person came into our lives. And she's just amazing, this person. And
Mhm.
her one piece of advice that stuck with me and I suppose changed it for me was, do not treat him any different to how you treat Nathan. And from that, Finley doesn't get treated any different. So he does everything that a normal child does. He goes to soft play, he plays football, he goes swimming, he does everything that a normal child does, and he will continue to do that. And I say to Sam all the time, Poland syndrome might be the reason for many things in Finley's life, but it will not be the reason why Finley does not do something or why Finley does not try something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is the way he will grow up. He obviously will be aware at some point that he is different to everybody else. But
Mm-hmm.
in our house and with his family and with his friends, he's treated like everybody else. Because that's really important to us, because we don't want him growing up thinking he's different, and we don't want him to be any different. And I suppose he has all these amazing people who he sees, like yourself, like Lewis, and as I said earlier, all these incredible, incredible people who have Poland syndrome, who are like everybody else, who are
Mm-hmm.
athletes, who are so inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that's a good thing about PIP, that they have brought everybody together. So
Mm-hmm.
growing up, the world for me doesn't seem as scary for him, because I can look at all these people and think, do you know what? This is going to be okay for him, which I suppose, as his mum, reassures me massively for him.
Yeah. And if it's any consolation, that's how my parents raised me. It was very much of, I mean, I got into sports really young, and so I think that that really helped. But if I can say anything from my experience, is that if you kind of go through your journey not making a big deal of it, it does allow you to do things and to achieve things. And when you achieve those things, you feel so much better because you can kind of sit with yourself and say, I did this and I am missing, a pec muscle, or I was at technically a disadvantage and I still did it. And so it does feel a lot sweeter and a lot more rewarding knowing that you can do things that quote unquote able-bodied people can do. Um, and so I'm really excited to see Finney's journey with that and to see what he achieves. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I think the group that Pip has put together is an amazing, amazing group of inspirational people to look at, whether it's the athletes or the comedians or the creatives, just seeing that diverse group of people. I mean, that I didn't grow up seeing. And so I'm really excited to see this younger generation of kids grow up with those role models and to see how that ultimately changes the course of their journey. I do want to ask, going back to kind of your work and your experience with the healthcare systems, how do you think healthcare professionals could improve their awareness or understanding of, rare diseases like Poland syndrome so that they can avoid these misdiagnoses or this mistreatments in the future? What do you think they can do to improve that awareness?
So I think there needs to be some form of toolkit or training designed more so specifically, and I hate saying health. I don't like targeting all professionals as the same, as that makes sense, because they're not. I am sure there are some incredible health visitors who have some exceptional knowledge about Poland syndrome, but in my experience, that's not been the case.
Mm-hmm.
And my GPs have been amazing with Finley. It's just been the health visitors we've came across, and it's a repeated story that I hear about it, from people who've contacted me, with their children that have Poland syndrome. And I think, considering, especially in Scotland, I'm not sure about the rest of the UK, it's the health visitor who has primary responsibility for the children until the age of 5 or until they go to school. And there needs to be some form of awareness, some form of training done with these professionals with regards to, like, a flowchart or a toolkit or training
Mm-hmm.
to do with, and I suppose it's hard, but specifically for Poland syndrome, like, and in Finley's case, okay, so you have this child has been born with a webbed hand. This mum is now highlighting further things to you, such as the hand that's webbed is now got a growth problem. Okay, so then what else to look out for? Things like that. And then there's now a sunken chest involved as well. There's now like a weakness in this chest. To me, all those things, I Googled it and I'm not a medical professional and I got Poland syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
There just needs to be a flowchart when it comes to rare diseases for healthcare professionals and also a way of speaking to the parents.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I complained about the health visitor and then I got a new health visitor and then the new health visitor who was aware of the complaint, their finishing line to me was, I can't wait to see Finlay. I can't wait to see what he looks like. I've never met anybody with Poland syndrome before. And I just thought to myself, he looks like any other child.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to appointments in the community and you don't get one healthcare professional, you get two or three healthcare professionals because everybody wants to see the child with Poland syndrome. There
Yeah.
just needs to be awareness. And I've spoken with Sam and I'm hopefully in Scotland, we've launched the Scotland branch of PIP, and hopefully we're going to design some leaflets, some toolkits to distribute around the healthcare professionals with regards to doing some work with them and raising awareness for Poland syndrome um, and what to look out for and kind of signposting them as well. Because there is a PIP charity, so if you have a family that have Poland syndrome, why would you not signpost them to the PIP charity? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's me. I just don't understand that. Um, when there are people there that can help, there just there there just needs to be so much more done with the healthcare professionals. Considering how amazing the children's hospital is, why does the community healthcare professionals not echo that? I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my mission to try
Yeah.
and change it in Scotland.
Yeah, I think especially if we can incorporate that into, like you're saying, the foundational learning so that newer, younger people who are coming into the system, it's naturally what they're taught. So even if it's not the most common condition to look out for, they at least know that it exists, so that if they do come across it, they can then go back to their books and see how to handle it instead of looking at something and going, oh, I've never heard of this before in my life. I think even something like that, just knowing that it exists and then going back to your books or your toolkit. And if you have a case or if you're dealing with someone who has Poland syndrome, then you can, know how best to deal with it. So I think that would make a huge change, kind of introducing that into the system now so that when the younger generation of healthcare professionals catch up, they at least know that Poland syndrome exists. I think
Yeah.
that's the scary thing is that you'll go to a healthcare professional and they won't even know what you're talking about. Um, and so if we can try to change that, that would be amazing. And in terms of, support and resources for families and individuals who are either dealing with Poland syndrome or have a family member who has Poland syndrome and is dealing with that situation, what would you say are the most critical needs or areas of focus for those families or for those individuals? Obviously, like you're saying, getting into contact with groups like PIP or finding communities, but what other areas would you recommend to people listening to this in terms of focusing on?
Um, so obviously PIP, I would say to everybody if they have a child with Poland syndrome, PIP is a massive it's a massive lifeline. And I think as well, the for me, I felt really not empty, but after Finley's diagnosis, it was kind of like, here's his diagnosis, away you go. And it was just this whole, our whole world had just changed. And there was nothing there, and obviously your friends and your family, they support you, but they don't understand it because they're living it as well, but it's not their child, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I suppose for things like Finlay has had so many hospital appointments because it just seems to be everything's just it's his Poland syndrome, it's his Poland syndrome, and then he gets referred to another specialist. Oh, that's his Poland syndrome, and he just has all these hospital appointments, and you're trying to manage all these hospital appointments, and it's a struggle. And I suppose PIP is just a lifeline because it's people who understand and it's people who go through it as well. So I would say reach out to PIP and become an expert. You become an expert in it, and what you don't know, you find out as you go along. And I guess you realise that it's not as scary as what you think it's going to be. Purely because of the group that's now been created and all these inspirational people that we can now see are achieving all this stuff. And you're like, do you know what? This isn't as crazy. You look at you on Instagram smashing all your fitness stuff, more fitter than I could ever imagine. And I'm like, oh, look what Giselle can do. This is going to be fine for Finlay. Or I look at Lewis or Clay, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
this is going to be fine. So I would tell the parents, go and look at all these inspirational people because seeing the days that you're struggling and you see all
Hmm.
these inspirational people doing all this inspirational stuff, you know your kid's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Um, and reach out to people because people are there to help you. Um, yeah, I would just and turn your I I let my anger fester for a wee while. Um, and I would just say turn your anger into positivity and just
Hmm.
fight for the change because it helps and it turns it into a positive situation. And
Yeah.
it's positive. It's not scary. It's not the end of the world. And the Poland community are an amazing, lovely bunch of people. So that is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, something my parents told me when I got diagnosed was obviously, as a parent, one of the first questions they asked the doctor was, is my child going to be okay? And the doctor said, yeah, no, she's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. And that really put them at ease because, I think it is scary. It's you, as a parent, you don't know what's going on and you want the best for your child. And so I think to see other people in the Poland syndrome community doing just fine and doing better than fine, thriving, I think must be a massive relief. And so I definitely agree with that. And I think that's why it's so important to have these people to look up to as well. Um, just before we end off, I want to ask Jen, looking forward, what are your hopes or your visions for Finley's future and also the future for the broader community with regards to awareness and understanding Poland syndrome, within the community and also the medical community as well? What are your goals? What are you hoping to achieve, and what would you like to see for everyone involved?
So for Finlay, I just want him to be happy. And I want him to be accepted. That's all I want for Finlay. And for the Poland community, I want there to be awareness within the medical professional, and I want for no family to have to go through what we went through. And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is I don't want a mum or a dad or a care provider going to somebody saying, look at my child, I think there's something wrong with my child, and then being told, no, 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 that's all in your head. Because
Mhm.
I just think we're in the 21st century. You can put people in the moon, you can do all sorts of stuff. I just don't think that there is any need for that in this world. Um, it's a medical condition, and I think the fact it is a medical condition, there needs to be more awareness of the medical condition, and I would love for it to be spoke about the way that other medical conditions are spoken about, and for there to be an awareness of it. It would give me nothing more than joy for a family to speak to their healthcare professional and say, my child, and it obviously doesn't even need to be a webbed hand, because as we know, some people can have Poland syndrome without webbed hands or without differences in their limbs. For a parent to say to a healthcare professional, these are the symptoms with my child, and for a healthcare professional to say, do you know what? I think that sounds like Poland syndrome. Let me get a referral to the hospital. And do you know what? Here is the charity that works with families with Poland syndrome. Make contact to them. That would give me no more joy in life than for that to be where we're at with it. And for parents there to be so much awareness of it that parents know that it's not scary, because there is people, it's openly spoken about, there's a community that's growing, there's awareness that's growing, and it's everybody knows that it's okay. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm on a mission to achieve.
And yeah, I was just about to say, I have no doubt that that mission will be achieved, especially with the work that you're doing and that Sam is doing with PIP, and everyone coming together and really kind of just bulldozing through all these stereotypes and stigmas, and really, creating that awareness for Poland syndrome around the world. And so I am really excited to see what comes of this, and very grateful for people like you and like Sam who are taking, the traumatic experiences that you guys had and really using that to fuel a bigger purpose, and ultimately change the course of so many people's lives, and to be able to give them that community that makes things okay and makes them feel accepted and loved and seen. And so from my side, I just wanted to say thank you to you for doing that, and I'm excited to see this really grow in Scotland and beyond as well. And I'm grateful and thankful that I could have your time and hear a little bit more about your story and Finley's story and all of the amazing things that you guys have coming up for this year. So thank you so much for your time, Jen. It was great chatting to you. As we leave, is there anything that you want to let the listeners know that they can maybe look out for when it comes to activities or community events or activations that you guys have coming up this year?
So Sam and myself are going to the Children's Hospital for Rare Disease Week. We are going to the atrium alongside the Office of Rare Conditions, which we are super excited about, to do some awareness raising for Poland syndrome. And I am hopefully, along with Sam and some other PIP volunteers, going to be planning a patient information day. That's still in the pipeline, and we will share some information with that as well. And hopefully we are going to do a get together in Scotland for families with Poland syndrome as well this year.
Amazing. Amazing. So if everyone wants to just keep eyes on PIP's socials, then I'm sure they'll be able to see when and where these events are taking place. Jen, thank you so much for your time. I'm excited to see everything that comes out of it this year. And yeah, just thank you for being such a massive part of the community.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us and subscribe to our podcast, and follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook. See you soon.